Alright, I'm back for part 2 for the 2007 Dodge Ram 2500 HD with the 6.7. Evan's back riding his four-wheeler. But this is one that had a no crank, no start, CAN issues, PCM issues, TIPM issues, wiring issues. Not exactly sure yet, but we've been troubleshooting it. I got a remanufactured one from Dorman. I'm not saying that's the problem. I'm not saying that's the only problem. But it comes with all the fuses in there. We plugged everything in. And what it tells you in the directions to do is, from Dorman, it says, due to some configuration and dealer install options, please verify fuse configuration of the replacement TIPM matches the configuration of the TIPM you're removing. Talks about aftermarket stuff with push button start he doesn't have. So TIPM configuration: the cabin control node, PCM and instrument clutcher must be connected to the vehicle and functioning correctly before a replacement TIPM can be installed. Well, I think there's obviously issues with this ECM as well, so who knows. After installing replacement TIPM, which we did, the module will try to pull build configuration and VIN from the above mentioned modules. Insert the key, turn it to the run position, and do not attempt to start the vehicle and wait 120 seconds. Sorry, I just put my finger over that. And turn the key on, put it in ignition, key on, engine off for 120 seconds. Not starting. I still have no Prindle. So let it do for 120 seconds, and then after that, it tells you, after waiting for 120 seconds, turn the key off and then back to run. Clear any stored DTCs before starting. Start the vehicle and ensure all electrical features are working properly. If the vehicle does not store or some electrical features that are not working properly, use a factory-approved scan tool to verify proper build configuration and VIN stored in the TIPM. If they are incorrect, they must be properly configured using a scan tool before attempting to start the vehicle. Okay, so I'm going to pause this and let it go for 120 seconds. Alright, it's been 120 seconds, so I'm going to turn the key off. And then it tells you to turn it back to run and clear any codes. So I'm going to hook up my scan tool again, and then I'm going to go show you if there's any codes and clear them. Alright, we're doing a full system scan. But I noticed the service four-wheel drive lights on. Still no Prindle. But we'll continue to scan here. 6 codes in the central gateway. Let it continue to scan. Alright, so I did a full system scan. I'll hit report. And then it looks like we got ABS lost comm with ECM still. ABS lost comm with TIPM. Original VIN mismatch. Configuration. Central gateway. All these fog lamp cabin heaters. All these different codes. ECU configuration for the wireless control. Bunch of stuff. Let's clear everything and then go from there. So I cleared everything, but there's still codes that came back. And if you look, ABS lost communication with ECM. Central gateway has a fog lamp, headlamp, battery, vehicle configuration not programmed. That's a big one. Heater stuff. Anyway, so let's try to crank it and start it. So if you listen, it does crank over now. Before, it never cranked. Let me do that again. Recycle power. Still no Prindle. It cranks over. But I have no RPM tack either. I have an RPM. I don't have no movement on the RPMs. So, okay, it cranks, but it's still not starting. And I also plugged everything back in. All my sensors, my fuel injector harness, pressure sensors, all of that. So now, if you go into the central gateway, pull this up here. We know the codes. If I go to special, well, let's go to ECU information first. Here's the ECU information for this TIPM. let's go back and go to special function. And let's go to relearn TIPM VIN. Key on, engine off. The purpose of this routine is to erase the totally integrated power module program status, which will force the TIPM to relearn the current VIN from the engine controller. Warning, the configuration data will be lost in the TIPM and may require a vehicle reconfiguration once this routine is completed. So if I hit OK, it says this process will take a few seconds, but it says test aborted conditions not correct. So then if I go back, hit set VIN, you can use this function to read and write the VIN. This function only supports new ECU to write VIN, and old ECU doesn't support this function. So if I go OK, this VIN is not valid. Press OK to modify it. Yeah, all Y. So I hit OK. This is the VIN right here. That's from the VIN from the truck. I hit OK. Is this right? Yes. And it's going to fail. The selected function is not supported by the ECU. So, nothing else with this, but I have a still, it cranks over when I do it, but it doesn't run and have no tack movement. So now, see if there's anything else I can look at here. What I want to do now is I want to check my CAN bus at behind the TIPM and see what that shows next on the vehicle, like I did in part 1, just to compare data. Maybe, I think obviously there's still a ECM issue as well. Here's over data, live data. Signal not available from the RPM. Let's watch that. Still no signal. Well, if I can't read the VIN in the PCM, then how's this thing going to write it, I guess, right? Unless I need a YTEC 2.0 to program it, but I would think the Autel should do it. That's why I still think we have another issue like the ECM issue. Here's all the configuration stuff. Anyway, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull out my oscilloscope and look at some more data on the actual TIPM. All right, so with the new TIPM in, 120 ohm termination resistor in the TIPM, another 120 ohm I put in parallel, so I got 60 on the bus, just like I did in part 1. I'm back probing it, or not back probing, I got the connector off and I'm probing between CAN high and CAN low. I'll have to see which one I'm on right now. But I got key on, engine off on the truck. I'm going to put a trigger on. So that's CAN high. So freeze it. So that's what I had in part 1. So that is the same exact thing I had in part 1 for the TIPM. So that, like I said in part 1, I thought I'd have a square wave. Apparently not. This is a new TIPM. I doubt this one's bad. So that tells me that we got the same results as the old TIPM for CAN high. Now let's go to CAN low. So now I put it in CAN low, which is the other wire. And then I got the same results as in part 1. If I freeze it, 2.5 volts going down. But it looks the same as it did in part 1 of the video, which tells me that that's how the signal is supposed to be on these TIPMs. So was the TIPM bad? Well, not for the signal part, but it's bad for the, it would never crank, but now it actually cranks over. So that circuit that controls that T41 sense circuit in the schematics is actually, that's good in this circuit. So that's starting circuit's good because we can crank it over. But now we still have an ECM issue, right? Because we have no live data, there's no codes, we can't read any of that data. I mean, we can read codes, but there is no codes. It's no VIN that's pulling up from the engine. I try to write the VIN into the TIPM. It won't let me with the scan tool. I don't know if it's because it's pulling it from the PCM and it's not letting me write it, or do I have to have YTech 2.0 in a pass-through device, which I have, and I can program it. But I also think there's another issue with the ECM. I think both these modules went out around the same time, obviously, because now we can crank. Now we have a crank, no start, when before we had a no crank, no start. And now we just have a crank, no start. So we're gonna have to do some more troubleshooting as far as that goes. All right, so I plugged everything back in for the TIPM, the connector, key on engine off. It still cranks over, but no start. Cleared all the codes from the connector being unplugged, and what I have now, ABS module lost comm with ECM, central gateway, all of these configuration stuff, codes, vehicle configuration, programmed, heater codes. Well, if you remember when I said earlier, it says when you do this 120-second key cycle, it's supposed to pull all that information from other modules, such as the PCM and instrument cluster. Well, the PCM's not working, then how's it going to pull that information? And if it doesn't, then you can use this factory scan tool, which we have a good scan tool, and you can write the VIN, which, like again, if I go into this, to the central gateway, so I'm going into the central gateway, the TIPM, right? I go to special function, which I've already done this, but I'll look at it again. I go to set the VIN, and it doesn't let me do it, but this says you can use this function to read and write the VIN. This only supports a new ECU, which this is. It's remanufactured. Hit OK. It says the VIN is not valid, it's all Y's. So, okay, I hit OK. This is the VIN. I got it memorized, saved in there. Hit OK. Is it correct? Yes. And it doesn't write it. So one of two things. It says it's not supported by the ECU. One of two things I think is happening now is either A, the ECM is bad, which I believe it is, and or B, we got to have YTech 2.0 in a J box, which I have. We got to program it from that using a pass-through device, battery maintainer and all that stuff. So some more research needs to be done on that part. So then we also want to relearn the TIPM. Purpose of this is to routine is to erase the TIPM program status, which will force the TIPM to relearn the current VIN from the engine controller. So it wants to relearn from the engine controller. Well, the engine controller says it'll take a few seconds and it's going to fail. Test aborted, conditions not correct. It's trying to pull it from the engine controller and it can't because we can't find the VIN in the PCM. So if I go back to the PCM now, and I go to read codes, no codes. If I go to live data, it's going to have a no comm, just like we did in part 1. Service 4-wheel drive still on in the TIPM because it hasn't been configured, I would imagine. Prindo's still off because I'm pretty sure it gets the Prindo from the ECM. I'd have to look at the schematics again. Yeah, no comm. So then let's go to special function for the ECM is what we're in. Let's go to set VIN. Actually, before we do that, let's just go to reset the ECU for the engine computer. Has been reset. Cycle the ignition. We cycle the ignition. Crank no start. So let's go to set VIN. It's going to read and write the VIN. And it's going to say the VIN's not valid, I would imagine, like it did. Yeah, the VIN is not valid. Press OK to modify it. So which is this VIN here? Is this right? Yes. And then it's going to say it's not supported by the ECU. Again, do I need YTech to do that? Or is the actual computer ECM bad? So it for sure needed a TIPM at this point, it looks like, because now it cranks over. I think there was a circuit issue with the TIPM that wasn't cranking. Obviously, no crank, no start in part 1, but now it cranks over. But now we got to get the VIN written into the TIPM, Central Gateway Module, whether it's pulling it from the ECM, which is not working correctly, or we need to use YTech and a JBox pass-through to program it. All right, before I wrap up part 2, I want to do one more test. We're going to see if we can communicate with the TCM module. But before I do that, like I said, this thing's been kicking my butt. But there's a guy in Ontario, Canada. The company's Auto Electric Connection. Let me say that again. Sorry, a car drove by. It's in Ontario, Canada. Company's called Auto Electric Connection. I believe his name is William, or they call him Bill. I've never met him personally, but he's been helping me out significantly. He's very familiar with these TIPMs, these Dodges, and he's just way into this kind of stuff. So he's been awesome helping me out, giving me pointers how to troubleshoot, which way to go with this, and trying to figure this vehicle out. And we're getting somewhere, so that's awesome. So now, if you go into the powertrain, you go into the TCM, which is part of CAN C bus, and I go to read codes. I can communicate with the TCM. We had no codes in the TCM. It's a separate module. But if I go to special function and I go to set VIN, it'll actually, I'm not going to change the VIN, but the VIN is valid. Right there is the VIN. So the PCM, or ECM they call it, won't let us do that. So like I said, to wrap this part 2 up, we're going to have to do a little bit more troubleshooting, but a couple things need to happen now. Is we got to get the VIN written into the TIPM, whether it pulls it from the ECM, that is probably bad, or may not be bad, or hook up YTech and a J2534 pass-through and program it that way and go from there. Alrighty, I said I know I was done, but I took the new TIPM out, put the old one back in. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to start it again, cranking it. You can see I'm trying to crank it there. Nothing. Right? So what I want to do now, so that proves we need a TIPM because of that starting circuit in the TIPM, and who knows what else is wrong with the old TIPM. But like I said, it needs to reprogram the VIN in there, and or highly suspect it needs a new ECM because there's no live data and no codes. So we go to special function in the old TIPM, and I want to see, what I'm trying to see is, I can't remember if I did this in part 1, if the VIN is in this vehicle or in the TIPM. Yeah, the old VIN, the VIN is in the old TIPM. So, which makes sense. So the VIN is in the TIPM. So, like I said, I'm not trying to beat a dead horse, but what I'm going to do next is do some more research as far as programming the VIN into it, if it needs a pass-through JBox from YTech 2.0, or the ECM is actually in fact bad as well. Maybe like both modules got taken out because of something. So that is it for part 2 for this 2007 Dodge Ram 2500 with the 6.7 diesel.